Hello, everybody. Nice to see you here. My name is Anastasia Stepanova. I'm a head of SCF program. And I would like to introduce you. Olga Ivantsova, who is a segment director in Rostelecom, and she's responsible for ESG and for some IR things. And I know that Olga is keen on ESG things, and she does some research in that area. Olga has graduated from SCF program from Universiteit, I guess 9 years ago. Yeah, am I right? I think so.
Yeah, it was 9 years ago.
And now she is also lecturing a course on sustainable finance for SCF students. So I think that's enough. Yeah, and I'm really happy Olga agreed to participate in this webinar series.
Okay, thank you, Anastasia, very much for the invitation and this opportunity to talk some more about ESG. Although I think that's the one topic that I have been talking about maybe too much lately. But when we were discussing this webinar, I think we set a bit vague topic about ESG, but looking at the previous webinars, I decided to make the first part maybe a bit about my career experience, maybe share some with you, maybe you will find it helpful. I hope so. So let's start. I will start demonstration of my small presentation. Can you see it? Is it okay? Yeah. Okay, so first I would like to ask everybody who joined to write in the chat where you're studying now, like in what year. So I would better understand the audience that we have and what may be more interesting for you. And also we'll take questions at the end of my presentation, also via chat. So yeah, so the first part about basically me and my experience. There are some things that I really wanted to share maybe with future generations, just some maybe advice. So as Anastasia already said, that I graduated from strategic corporate finance from High School of Economics, and before that I got my bachelor's degree from Moscow State University from Faculty of Economics. And also I had another master's degree from Vrije University Amsterdam in finance and banking. And also I'm a CFA charter holder since 2016. What I wanted to point here, if we're talking about my career path, that I just wanted to stress that I think it's really important to talk when you're studying, to talk to people who already studied there before you, or maybe with your teachers, or maybe with some other industry practitioners, because I, for example, got very lucky. I had a really nice talk with Anastasia Stepanova, and it was such a good talk. I remember this talk very vividly. It's just personal story, because in my day, I don't know how it is right now for you, but in my day, it was very popular to want to go to work in investment banking, and people were very keen on this idea, and they were preparing themselves for like killer working hours and so on. And at that moment, I really was undecisive. I didn't know what to do, and everybody around me was talking about IB, but I had a great talk with Anastasia, and she just told me that there is such a thing as equity research. which basically means that I don't know how well you're familiar with that industry, but basically it means that financial analysts analyzing companies and giving their recommendations. And I thought that it was very interesting to start a career there because I really liked financial analysis and all these other related areas. So I started to look into opportunities in equity research. So after I graduated, I was lucky to have 2 internships in equity research. They were very brief, although I got my first impressions of the industry, my first basically work experience. Although one of my first work experience were for Corporate Finance Center, again, where we had a research project on corporate governance and banks. And that experience was also very, very useful because I got my first try in data collection and so on. And during my internships in equity research, like in ING Bank, it was in Amsterdam, right after my second master's, and I was like intern for the entire team of like 20 analysts. Of course, I was not working with like 20, or maybe with 5 of them, but I got tasks like from various industries, various tasks, and again, it was very helpful for me to get a feel of like how industries are different. And also I tried maybe for the first time the real financial modeling, like how it goes in reality, and data collecting. And after that I had a very similar internship in equity research in Moscow already, in Bank of America. Although I was an intern only for one industry, for metals and mining, and I was, that was my specialization, and I learned, I learned a bit about this industry, but of course the internship was very short. And after that, I wanted to stay in equity research, but in 2012, as a result of financial crisis, equity research was going smaller, and not many people were hired, especially not very many young ones. So yeah, I couldn't continue my internship there. But again, I wanted to point out that there in Bank of America, I got a very useful advice. At least I consider it to be very useful. I got advice to take CFA exams. People were telling me that after your like formal education, it might help to catch up with some maybe new trends or theories, and maybe some additional topics that you did not learn during your like formal bachelor's and master's. So after that, I spent 1 year in consulting in Ernst & Young in valuation business modeling, and there I took my first CFA exam, which was very stressful, but I think very useful. So what was happening in consulting there in valuation business modeling? Maybe you are interested in going there. If you are, I would highly suggest doing that. So I got to do, again, real life financial analysis, industry research, financial modeling, valuation, and I started to learn how to make proper presentations. But you know, presentations that are often in forms of report, not just, you know, pretty pictures, but very heavily oriented on financials and information. And also I got a like feel of industries, such industries like telecoms, transportation, machinery, oil and gas, agriculture, and so on. Again, I didn't have any specialization, and I think it's for me in the beginning it was very beneficial that I got a chance to look at different industries and to understand what's going on there, what are drivers there, yeah, and how they are different. So after that, and till present day, I work for a corporation. It's been 7 years already. So I work for Rostelecom. Rostelecom is the largest communications provider in Russia. It has the largest revenue. So I'm confidently say that we are the largest. And I work there in investor relations. And when I was studying and when I was working in Ernst & Young, I didn't know what investor relations was. I only heard about investor relations during my internships in equity research, because basically equity research analysts and investor relations, there are two counterparts that work together very often. So I understood then that investor relations, there are those people within the company that can talk to analysts and they can provide information, comments, maybe even some forecasts and so on. So now I'm that person in the company, Rostelecom. And one of my primary functions is to communicate with investors and analysts. We also do disclosure of information. I also do financial analysis for like internal purposes, and modeling market research, again for internal purposes. And recently, since 2019, I also work on ESG disclosure and work with ESG ratings agencies. So what we have few biggest projects in our area of investor relations, and they basically include quarterly results, disclosure of quarterly results, annual reports. Our new annual report should be published tomorrow. Dividend policy, strategy announcements, and right now it's ESG disclosure. Of course, it varies from company to company, and here is the situation, particularly with my company, with my investor relations department. But in different companies, sometimes investor relations also do more public relations, more PR, or sometimes they're involved in M&A and so on, or sometimes in strategy. But here, basically, the key functions and big projects, what we do here in Rostelecom. Also, I added the link if you want to look at our website and look what we do, see what we do. So here's the link, you can find it online. So what I wanted to share first about my my experience. Maybe if you're looking to start a career, maybe you'll find it useful. So first, that I learned that equity research is very interesting industry, and I'm really grateful for Anastasia for her advice to look into this industry, because it gave me a lot. But unfortunately, the industry is very small. There are not too many positions. Yeah, and it was the problem in 2012 for me after the crisis. But again, it's the industry became even smaller due to some legislation changes. I will not bore you with those. But that's the situation that we have. We have very few equity research analysts, and every analyst is covering like a lot of companies. Yeah, and their workload is pretty high. before banks, they had like 2 or 3 analysts per one industry, and right now they have 1 analyst per 2 or 3 industries. So basically that's how the dynamics changed. The second lesson that I learned is that consulting is a great way to start a career. I personally learned a lot, developed many skills that are useful till this day. And also you will learn to work under pressure, and you realize if you're willing to do that for long term. And the third lesson that I maybe wanted to mention is that taking CFA exams was again very beneficial for me, as I believe so. It was a challenge, of course, and it was tough, and it took a lot of time and effort. But as a result, I feel like I got this final touch on some systematic knowledge that just added to the formal education. And also right now the program is changing every year, and they added more and more topics that are more and more relevant to recent trends. So a few years ago, like maybe 2 or 3, I think they added ESG into their program, and they're continuously developing and improving the program. So I think it's very beneficial to at least maybe try to read the materials or look at their website. They have a great website, for example, about ESG, a lot of research, and it's all public and free. So I would highly suggest if you're interested like in finance in different areas, definitely look at CFA Institute, not just in terms of exams, but also as a resource of information. So a little bit more, I wanted to talk about advantages of work investor relations, and I think just wanted to share with you because when I was studying, I didn't know about it. I didn't know what it was. And when I just found an announcement, a vacancy, a description, and I was surprised, and so it sounded very interesting. And it turned out to be very interesting as well, because, you know, I think investor relations maybe is a unique combination of external communications and analytical functions. So basically, if you're interested in finance and financial analysis, you do all that, maybe not as heavily as in the role of financial analyst per se. But again, you do a lot of analysis, but also you combine it with talking about the results of this analysis, or talking about the results of the company with the external people, with investors, analysts, and shareholders. And for me, I think it's very interesting and unique, because that you can combine these two roles in one area, in one department. So also, I wanted to share with you, I think, the advantages that I find particularly interesting. First is access to top management, because IRs, they usually work very closely with CFOs, sometimes CEOs, strategy vice presidents, and you have the opportunity to be part of this process. You can see how the strategy of the company is developing, and you can see the people who basically make the history and make these big decisions, top-level decisions. So the second point that I think it's very fascinating is access to institutional investors. And I absolutely love meeting with them, because it's often, not always, of course, but often very great conversations with people who have a lot of responsibility in terms of money. When you're talking to portfolio manager, you see the way they think. You see how they, what influences their decisions, how they make these decisions, and it's really interesting. Like, if you want to be this portfolio manager, it's also very cool. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you about the buy side and portfolio managers, but I think they're all very cool people and very interesting to work with. So another interesting point is, again, access to equity research analysts, and we're always in talks with them. And basically what talking with analysts makes, it makes you think always in a critical way. You're always have to look at the company, its financials from the outside perspective, but still you're on the inside. So you know what's going on the inside, but you'd also try to look at their external perspective and see how the things look from the outside. And very often they think the internal view and external view, they're in conflict, and you are standing in the middle, and you have to, it's your job to communicate in a proper way what's happening on the inside. Yeah, and also I think what I really like about my job, comparing to, for example, consulting, is that the results of my work are public, and it's not some report that that is not being used like by anybody. You just spent like a lot of hours doing this, and nobody's using it. It's not the case here. You can always see the results of your work because they're public. Although again, every IR is different, and maybe for some people it's not like this. I'm just talking about my story. So for example, just here is the example of slide, just to show you that these are just strategic results, and you can find them on the website with the link that I showed you on one of the slides, or just Googling Rostelecom Investor Relations. It shows very, very easily. So I don't know, it makes me really happy that our results and results of my work are available to anybody. So what's happening next with me? And again, it's heavily influenced by what's happening in the world. So in the next part, I'm going to talk a bit about ESG, but in a global context. ESG is environmental, social, and governance factors. It's a hot topic now. Some people even call it hype, and don't believe that there is a value in even thinking about ESG, considering ESG. But I personally don't think so. I think that we definitely should look at this. And I just wanted to say as a premise that, so this trend is being very strong in the world, and more investors are looking into ESG and asking about ESG. And that's why I, as a part of investor relations, started to look closely at ESG and work with ESG disclosure and ESG providers. So what is ESG? Just maybe for your reference, some terminology here, because you always hear these different terms like sustainability, sustainable finance, responsible investing, ESG. So here is presented that sustainability is the bigger concept, and within it we have sustainable finance, and just within sustainable finance we have responsible investing, meaning that investors who consider ESG factors within their investment decision making process, not just financials but also ESG. And also we have, as a part of sustainable finance, corporate ESG strategy of corporations like Rostelecom and others. And within that, we have corporate social responsibility. Why I put it here? Because corporate social responsibility is a very old concept. It's very popular and very heavily discussed. But now we can see that it's only a small part of global ESG strategy of a company. So when we're talking about ESG, it's just a practical lens of all these concepts. Mainly, yeah, it's just practical lens or capital markets perspective of sustainability, I would say. Just to give you understanding, when we're talking about people, companies, investors, governments, I mean, less governance, it's more about companies and investors. When they're looking at ESG, they basically consider stakeholder approach as the basis of their view. They moved from shareholder approach, where a shareholder value was the main priority, but now when we're talking about responsible investing and responsible business, stakeholder approach is at the base of it, because it considers not only shareholders but also internal and external stakeholders of the company. So employees, management, creditors, suppliers, customers, society, and government. And all of this is considered when we're talking about ESG. Here are some definitions. I don't know if you need those. Just wanted to to maybe show you proper definitions if you're interested, and also say that there's a mix-up with terminology right now. Many people talk about responsible investing, but they're also known as a sustainable investment, ESG investing, impact investing, green investing, ethical investing. All of these things, they're basically talking about one thing, about ESG investing, I would say, or responsible investing. So so these are all in this ESG area. So what's happening right now, and why are we talking about all this? Why I started to do ESG and to look at ESG as part of my work? Why so many people are involved in ESG processes now? So I would say there are four main things happening. First, global authorities push for responsible behavior. They push it on a level of people, on level of companies, on level of investors, on global level, on level of global regulation, and so on. So they realize that we are in a great danger from environmental problems, and also there are a lot of social problems. So global authorities, they're pushing for more responsible approach across the board. As a result, investors, they also start integrating ESG in their investment decisions, along with financial factors. And as a comment, I'm saying here that the process is only starting, and the methods of properly integrating ESG are still developing. We don't have unified approaches, methods right now, unfortunately. So we are in the very beginning still. But the same goes for companies. For example, companies and businesses, they also strive to improve their ESG practices and disclosure, and they set long-term strategic targets. But I think the key reason for that is not because they want to be responsible. And for companies, I think even not the pressure from global authorities is the main reason for ESG integration. For companies, the main reason for ESG integration is investors. Just as for me and Rostelecom, investors start asking more questions, and companies realize that they need to do more. Of course, everyone starts with the disclosure of information and disclosure of what is already going on, because of course companies, they were not before that like heavily responsible. There are a lot of things happening in terms of especially of corporate social responsibility and so on, and environmental initiatives, but people just not used to talking about it a lot, and not used to publicly disclosing it. So now companies are being motivated by investors to do so. But again, for them, disclosure standards are being developed. They face additional pressure from ESG ratings, which are related to ESG disclosure. But also they face bigger problem that I did not put on the slide, but the bigger problem is that companies have to suggest the real changes in their businesses, and the changes should be so that it would not harm the business itself. So basically, it's a key, I think, idea of ESG, and the biggest misconception of about ESG investing. Biggest misconception is that ESG investing is automatically less profitable, or ESG practices, they're automatically detrimental to business value. And now people, of course, nobody wants to do something and get just the losses from it. Of course, everybody is trying to find ways to do ESG, but to do it profitably or less detrimental to their returns, profits, and so on. And another thing that is happening is that new ESG-related financial instruments are being issued by financial institutions, by companies themselves. These instruments are bonds, green, social, and sustainability linked, and loans, and also ESG funds are being created, specifically ESG focused equity funds, and also ESG index funds based on ESG indices like S&P, but only S&P ESG. And so these are, I think, 4 main processes that are happening at the same time. Everybody is under global pressure, and everybody has the problem with the lack of standards of everything, of financial instruments, of disclosure, of methods of investing. Everything is developing at the moment. But there are already some things developed, and we'll talk about them just in a second. So first, I would suggest to take a look at some ESG issues, like what are we talking specifically when we're talking about ESG? Like, what do we mean? Basically, when people, companies, investors look at ESG, they look at the combination of factors, but this combination of factors is it's very big, again, not standardized. Every company, investor, provider, they have their own definition of important factors. But here I wanted to list few the most important ones that I found from different sources. So when we're talking about environmental issues, what are the most important issues, like to maybe everybody, to collective community? First is climate change and carbon emissions. Second, air pollution, water pollution, problems with biodiversity, deforestation, energy efficiency, waste management, water scarcity, and environmental standards in supply chain. It's very important for businesses, and I think it's like the next step of integrating ESG in your business, when first you look at your impact, like what your business is doing, and then you also is responsible for the providers that you use and their standards in terms of ESG as well. So when talking about social issues, we look at customer satisfaction and product safety. Data protection is the big one these days. Gender equality and diversity, also the big one and highly discussed. Employee engagement and community relations, they're also important ones. Human rights, very important. Labor standards, health and safety, and again supply chain labor standards, the responsibility for providers. And we're talking about governance. I think it's a bit easier here because talks on governance are going for a long time. I think at least 20 years or so, maybe active talks. But discussions and regulations started to emerge even in the end of last century. So it's more developed topic. It's more high level, and it's more, I think you could say, standardized. So when we look at the governance, we look primarily on board composition and diversity, on committees and specifically audit committee structure, again, composition, diversity, bribery and corruption, compensation of executives, if it's fair, political contributions, if the company is sponsoring or lobbying some regulations. Whistleblower schemes is a channel to fight to prevent bribery and corruption. Business ethics, transparency of taxes, and shareholder rights. These are key topics in governance when we talk about it. So just a little bit, we'll go through, I would say, first three parts. First, what's going on with global authorities? I just wanted to give you a very quick look on key global initiatives and principles that exist right now. So first one, and the most global one, and the most, I think, important one and cited one, is United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 goals that are for, I think, everybody, for the future, for companies, countries, investors, for everybody. I have them here. So basically, I think every company, at least when they start to look at ESG, they start looking at ESG with these 17 goals. They use them as a guideline, and they usually pick few goals that are more relevant for their business model. For example, if we're talking about oil and gas, then of course they should look at and pick focus on goals, for example, 13, climate action, 15, life on land, and so on. For example, Rostelecom is it's a company with less environmental footprint but more social responsibility, I would say. We have a very large personnel number. It's over 130,000 people. And also we have over 80 million clients of all services. So for us, so social goals are more relevant. For example, goal number 8, decent work and economic growth. Number 9, industry innovation infrastructure. Also we focus on number 4, quality education, as we try to, one of our new areas is providing online education and so on. But if we look at other global initiatives, we see that Paris Agreement from 2015 that states the goal of reducing carbon emissions is a very big one, very influential one, and it's I would say the key agreement for countries for their country level policies in terms of environmental impact and what should they do in terms of reducing their own emissions. Then we have United Nations Global Compact. It's again some kind of agreement and for companies, for corporations. So if companies they want to state and have this stamp of approval that they follow some sustainability guidelines, and their business is as sustainable as can be, and they run their business sustainably, so they sign and join this United Nations Global Compact. And for investors, we have another regulations, the United Nations Principles of Responsible Investment. It's very again, it's a very influential initiative. I think around maybe 3,000 of investors, institutional investors already joined. And again, they when they join, they state that their investments should be responsible and should adhere to the principles that are stated. Here just wanted to just give you names of key disclosure standards that are developing, because they're not fixed in stone at the moment. And I don't want to talk about them in detail, but just so you know, maybe if you hear something or read something, we have GRI, Global Reporting Initiative. It's like also a very relatively old initiative, and it's primarily used, I think, for sustainability reports of the companies, because usually companies, I think at least in Russia, but I think in many other countries, they have two types of reports. First is annual report, it's more business oriented and financial oriented, and another one, sustainability report. And sustainability reports basically focus on all things sustainability. Then we have SASB, Sustainability Accounting Standard Board. Again, it's all developing, and it's been, I would say, promoted by BlackRock. So people are saying that the standards would be maybe the key standards for sustainability reporting in the future. Then we have CDP. It's like the largest database of and also relatively old database of environmental data of companies on carbon emissions. And then we have TCFD, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. It also will be probably the biggest and the most important disclosure standard for climate-related information. So then we go to the next level, from the global one to investors. And why why investors they adopt ESG. I just wanted to name few trends why they cannot ignore, although at the beginning I think they really wanted to, because investors are very practical people, and they again they do not want to do something that will harm the returns of their clients and their businesses. So there are like a few trends, mega trends that investors cannot ignore. First, yeah, they're called mega trends by World Economic Forum. First is climate change, and that we have already like a wildly accepted global goal to to reduce emissions by 2050. Then we have inequality, like globalization, immigration, and other things that cause social unrest in some countries. And then we have digitalization and the rise of cybersecurity issues. So these are megatrends that are hard to ignore. Then we have regulation. Again, we talked about it, and yeah, there is another example of regulation is EU taxonomy. It's again European Union regulation on very similar topics. Then we have UN sustainable goals, sustainable development goals that we mentioned. And then I think one of the most interesting trends that I've seen mentioned a lot when we talk about investing in ESG, it's trend of wealth transition. What it says? It says that more and more capital is being gradually controlled by millennials, by new generation. And it turns out, according to many surveys, that millennials, they're twice as likely to care about responsible investing. They're twice as likely to invest in ESG or make impact investing than the previous generation. So yeah, so the client base often the clients of investors change, so investors also have to change with them. Yeah, and ESG is already being adopted by investors, by many investors. Here, I just stated few results of few surveys that say that there are institutional investor surveys by different companies, providers, and yeah, and you can see that in general, over half of the investors, depending of course on the sample, they include ESG or consider ESG in their or believe that the performance depends on ESG. So here I just summarized for you reasons for investors to incorporate ESG. They are based again on surveys, on other materials. So there are like three types of reasons to invest, to incorporate in ESG, in investment process. First is performance. Some people believe, and some people even prove, that ESG grants higher returns to investors and lower risk. Why? Because it is believed that companies that are responsible, they have better long-term prospects, I would say, and less and lower risk in terms of environmental, reputational, social, and all this like ESG types of risks. They have lower risks that are usually like omitted when you're making just a simple financial analysis. Responsibility. So again, they have fiduciary responsibility before their investors, and there are some also ethics and values of the companies, of the funds and investment companies themselves. And the third type of reasons, pressure. First is reputation, and I think in this hype atmosphere of around this ESG, reputational pressure is very high. So like if everybody's doing ESG, talking ESG, why are you not doing ESG? It's very, I think, a big question now for everybody, and I think everybody's trying to at least show that they're looking at ESG. And then we have external pressure, but as already said, external pressure from regulation, from clients, from activist shareholders, for example, sometimes from board of directors. Yeah. So, yes. Yeah, okay. We skipped a bit. Sorry for that. Just as I mentioned, maybe just for your information, I think we don't have time and energy to discuss it in detail today, but there are a few methods of ESG investing that I think it's interesting to keep in mind. First, and the oldest one, is negative exclusionary screening. It's when people already, I think, a long time ago stopped investing in tobacco or I don't know, for alcohol and so on. So in things that they consider like not responsible or ethically bad and so on. The second one is best in class selection or positive screenings, that when funds, when investors are looking for companies who are better performing. Now I think it's often described or measured in terms of ESG ratings. I think it's one of the simplest ways today. But yes, so this is the opposite. They're just looking for companies who are performing better in terms of ESG. Third one, I think the most popular one now is ESG integration. Is basically when you try to include ESG factors, ESG risks, maybe some ESG related financials in your financial model, in your classic financial model of valuation. Yeah, and I think that's maybe the most that's complicated on one hand to include it into your financial model, but on the other hand, it is less like it's less selective than the first two. The fourth method of ESG investing is also a very old one. It's shareholder engagement, active ownership. It basically means that when investors, they actively participate in the company's business and try to move it towards more responsible direction. The fifth one is impact investing, also very, I think, often used term, at least. And impact investing basically means that you invest in order to achieve particular targeted impact, meaning, like, for example, investor investing in I don't know, medical equipment that will help cure cancer, for example. That's particular example of impact investing, when you try to reach some particular impact, not just invest in best company in the industry, some classic industry, I would say. And the sixth one is thematic investing. It's very close to impact investing, but I think the very good example of this is renewable energy. When you just know that you're interested in renewable energy and you invest in those in companies from that industry. So yeah, then we talked about investors. Now just a few words about companies and what they're doing. We talked about disclosure, but I think the next step after the disclosure that is already going on is setting strategic targets. So companies include ESG in their strategies, and they and alongside they create processes to reach those ESG related goals. So here just some statistics on ESG goals of 50 companies from Fortune 250. And among top 50 companies, they found 715 ESG related goals. And as you can see, 33 firms report at least one ESG goal, meaning the majority of these top 50 companies, they reported ESG goals. Yeah, and right now, I think in everywhere climate goals are most broadly reported. I think it's it is explained by their importance that is stated in importance that Paris Agreement has all over the world. So now we're focusing on climate goals, trying to understand how to measure climate impact and so on. So I think the next step, and it already again has started, people started talking about how to measure social goals and how to estimate social factors and so on. Yeah, and here's examples of targets that companies cover in their ESG goals. They're very related to ESG factors that I showed you before, like in the beginning of ESG part. So just a few words what happened with me related to ESG. Again, as I already said, we understood that we also need to work on ESG disclosure, especially as an IR. So right now, I'm working on improving ESG disclosure. We made special website. We included a big section in annual report. We have a special presentation and special database on ESG factors. I also work with ESG rating providers. I'm in constant talks with them. And only last week, we announced our new strategy that includes ESG goals. So again, we are working on setting those goals, and we'll be working on monitoring those goals. And as already in the beginning, Anastasia said, we had a course on sustainable finance. Yeah, and I see already students here from that course. We had it in autumn, and where we discussed there all these topics in detail. Yeah, just to conclude what I wanted to say in regards to ESG topic, I would say that I think today and in the near future, what's going to happen, the climate change will stay the biggest topic because of Paris Agreement. Regulation will be developing, particularly maybe an asset management industry, but also I think for companies and for disclosures on state level. I've heard for that, for example, I think Moscow Exchange will make their ESG disclosure mandatory for its of the companies that are listed there. It did not happen yet, but it might happen in the very near future. Again, significance of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals will continue to grow because it's like the most global and the most, I think, easy to use framework for everybody. I think we will see a rise of ESG integration. As I said, it's one of the easiest ways to include ESG, but not limit your potential investees. There will be increasing interest in ESG from fixed income investors, and we already see more and more investors interested in fixed income instruments and more companies issuing green and social bonds and so on. And also one challenge that we still have is data challenge, is that we don't really know yet how to measure ESG properly, how to estimate social factors, environmental factors. So this challenge will be, I think, solved within a few years, and some global standards will be developed and may be widely accepted. So thanks for your time. That's it for my presentation. I'm sorry if it was too long. If you found it too long. Yeah, so right now let's look at your questions. Yeah, let's start with them. I see the first one. Is it possible to take all CFA exams while studying as strategic corporate finance student? I don't know. It's a very difficult question because when you're studying, when you're a corporate finance student, you have a lot to study already. You have a lot to do, and you have very heavy courses. I would say that what helped me, that I took my first exam a year after I graduated. So the fact that I remembered like everything from what I've learned in my master's and bachelor's, it really helped me in the first exam, because there are like general topics like microeconomics, macroeconomics, and so on. That's that you study in your program first. So I would not suggest doing that for sure. I think what helped me is that I was not studying at the moment. I was working. Of course, it was difficult, but at work, people take vacations if necessary before exams, and also it's easier for your brain to combine the workload with their study load. I think when you do it when you're when you're studying strategic corporate finance, your brain might explode. Yeah, and definitely not all CFA exams. I think it takes at least, I think, 2.5 years. I don't know how it goes now, but then it was at least 2.5 years. Regarding the slides, I will talk to organizers. Maybe we can share part of the slides yeah, I will see already Oksana answered that, sorry. What is the best way? Okay, that's a question from Oksana. What's the best way to get career in ESG? You know, it's a very, very, very good question, because right now I would say that we have a very new area of sustainability managers or sustainability directors. Unfortunately, I cannot comment on exactly what is their work like. But yeah, I'm not sure actually that at the moment you can start as a sustainability manager. I think the best way is to just enter the company, enter the corporation, or maybe it's better to again go to, if you want to start, maybe you should go to consulting, because again, consulting, they already have few projects, and the companies ask them to for their advice and their help on these matters. So it's not straightforward. So very not straightforward. Yeah, I think people who are sustainability managers now, they're people with years of experience in different areas, maybe environmental management is a key topic. So yeah. We don't have any more questions in the chat, but will we take questions from?
Thank you, Olga, for your interesting presentation. My question will be about biodiversity within ESG. And for the last 2 weeks, I get too many advertisements about animal cruelty, and in particular about one video about a rabbit who is being tested by cosmetics companies. And there is a list of huge cosmetics brands like Dior, Armani, Tom Ford, that use animals for testing their products. And the question is, how big is the impact of such popular issues on social media, like these viral videos, on ESG investors' behavior? Do these videos make cruelty-free companies more attractive for investors, or it's just a little thing that doesn't change too much?
Thank you for your question. First I must say, must remind you that again, what's so interesting and complicated about ESG, that it is very different. It varies so much from industry to industry. So what you explained is a very good example of what's happening within the cosmetics industry, right? I'm sure, I haven't heard about it because I'm not in that industry, but I'm sure that for investors that look at ESG and look at the cosmetics, it's definitely a factor. It's not a minor thing. Although I think that there is still a lot of investors who don't look at ESG, and of course it's nothing for them. But if we're for example look at less particular examples like you suggested, but if we look at oil and gas industry, right, you can see how what's happening to their share prices after another collapse or another catastrophe, right? So it's like just bigger examples, like more simple examples, but it shows that ESG issues, they do matter. And the industry that you suggested is just, I think, a bit later on the curve of industries that are industries implementing ESG and investors looking at ESG. Right, because these issues, yeah, they're being discussed around this industry for so long about testing things on animals, but only recently investors started to take it into account. And I think this industry, and also like fashion industry, is the big thing. They're a bit later on this path. First, we have oil and gas, you see it, and metals and mining, and the large-scale catastrophes. But I think we'll get there. We'll get to those industries too. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your question. Do we have another?
Hi. Okay. Hi. So I have a question around greenwashing. So how do we reconcile the problem of greenwashing to ESG investment? And secondly, is the second question. So, I mean, every investor is out to make profits, as much as I know. So what should incentivize me where I see an opportunity to earn more profits, rather than earning profit? I mean, relative to a firm that upholds ESG. I mean, there's a more profitable firm. What should incentivize me to bother about firms that are concerned about ESG, rather than just going where I know I plug my money and in a short while I earn returns immediately? So what should motivate an investor essentially in investing in ESG products? And of course, I mean, taking cognizance of the problem of greenwashing.
Okay. So let me share with you my screen again for the second part of the question. So first of all, thank you for your question and for bringing up greenwashing. It's a very important issue. Of course, I think that the problem of greenwashing will be solved when we have proper standards, or at least maybe widely accepted standards of disclosure of everything, of investors, companies, and so on. Because of course, right now, everybody is focusing on disclosure and they are making things look better than they are. And only when we have, in terms of ESG, something like IFRS that allows us to compare companies with each other, then I think this problem will be less, just will be less important. But you are completely right. It is very important. What I wanted to say in terms of why should you invest in ESG? One thing that I really believe in is that when we look at companies with a simple financial approach, we maybe and add ESG. We maybe we do not believe that ESG adds value, right? Maybe it doesn't. But what many people are saying that when we look in just simple financial way, we often do not account for ESG risks. And as a result, our estimates are skewed. In our course, we had examples of, for example, if we're talking about fashion industry, right? When we don't look at risks of social unrest or some, I don't know, social issues with the providers, we had examples in history when it caused problems for the company and, of course, lower profits, problems with share prices and so on. So I would say if you don't believe that ESG investing in ESG gives you additional returns, be sure that you've taken into account ESG risks. That not taking ESG into account does not distort your estimates. That I would say. Also, in a more practical way, I think now as an investor, you might invest in ESG because of the pressures. That's why I listed them on this slide, because now I think less and less people and I mean institutional investors have the opportunity to ignore ESG, because they're under such pressure from their shareholders, from the regulation and so on. So maybe they would like to invest in tobacco companies and get huge returns, but they just don't have opportunity. So I would say that if you're if you look simply at the returns, there are two reasons, right? One, can you ignore ESG? And the second, don't ignore ESG risks. Make sure that you account for them. I would say that. I hope I answered your question. So, okay, we have one more question in the chat. Since disclosure procedures are still developing, but government regulations are in effect, could we accept introduced risks because of developing disclosure procedures? I'm sorry, I'm not sure that I understand your question. You know, I try to comment on that. I don't think that government regulations are in effect, as you say, because they're also developing. So this process is going on very gradually. And it's not just that we already must oblige to some regulations, but we don't have standards. No, it's just going steadily, and everybody is working together on developing everything. And yeah, of course, as we already discussed in the previous question regarding greenwashing, people have to understand the problems with potential problems with disclosure, with disclosed data. So everybody should take into account that disclosed data may be not very good quality or distort the picture. So at the moment, yeah, that's the problem that we have, and everybody just should have it in mind. Just be aware of it. Yeah, so I think that's it, and we don't have any more questions, right?
Olga, I would like to thank you for the lecture. I think it was very informative, and in fact, we have one more, maybe last question.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, yes. So my question is still around disclosure. So I know some companies at the moment, practice ESG, they factor ESG in various, across various investment portfolios. So I'm just asking, at the moment, I understand there is not like a specific yardstick to measure social factors and environment. There are no, defined yardstick that cuts across, various firms as a whole. So like, I'm just asking, companies that are currently practicing ESG, what are the key variables under social factors, environmental factors, and governance? What are the key yardstick they border on? Like, what are the key variables they take cognizance of when discussing ESG as a whole? So I'm just asking basically so that I can be able to know, the major areas ESG essentially borders on in contemporary times, when it has to do with in practice. What are the key things they take cognizance of essentially?
Okay, and thank you. Very good question. Yeah, I did not state anything here. Just let me put up the slide that I showed you, as just to help me focus. But basically, when we look at every area, we just now have a few points that can be measured. For example, companies try to measure and disclose on a relatively constant basis their volume of carbon emissions. And they have targets regarding reducing carbon emissions like to a particular year. So that's a very common indicator. So just the volume and dynamics, of course, of carbon emissions of company. The second big one I would say is energy. Again, volume of energy used. and dynamics. Of course, everybody's trying to reduce and set targets on reducing, and also show the share of renewable energy in the whole energy that they used during the period. And other factors that could be measured also: amount of water used, amount of waste generated, and sometimes also amount of again, it's related to emissions, some particular gases, like I don't remember the examples of gases, but also can be measured and disclosed and looked at. But generally, I think in terms of targets and measuring volume of carbon emissions and energy used for environmental part. For social part, the big one that is easily measured is gender equality. People report a share of females in personnel of the company as a whole, and also in the management. Sometimes it's two different numbers. Also for health and safety, incident rate, number of incidents, fatalities, this set of indicators can be measured, can be reported, can be looked at. Sometimes people show employee engagement, but I would say that's a bit created measure. It's not very raw, I would say. In terms of governance, the biggest one is board composition, like share of independent directors in the board, share of female directors in the board, share of independent directors in all the committees, especially in audit committee. Some people look at relative executive compensation, like relative to maybe average wage of the employees, or maybe as a share of revenues, and so on. Sometimes people look at number of cases of briberies. ESG rating agencies and providers, they call it controversies, and usually collect these cases not from reporting of a company, but from news and articles and so on. They call it controversies, and they measure it. And also what's people are looking at this moment, although I find it very controversial, is the existence of policies in all these three areas, not just governance, but environmental, social governance. And I mean policy about human rights, ecological policy, environmental, code of ethics, and so on. And so people often ask if a company has the policy, and they made it plus to their database if the company has the policy, but there is often no evidence that the company acts in accordance with its policy. There is hope, and it is believed by default, but that's the big drawback of this particular set of factors when people are looking at the policies. And also, in addition to the answer to your question, if you're really interested in indicators, you can try to go, if you have, I don't know if you have access on Bloomberg or Thomson Reuters or Refinitiv Icon, or just Google ESG rating and find any rating provider like maybe sustainability or S&P. You can find factors that they are looking at, and if you look at Bloomberg and Icon, you can find the list of factors that they collect data on. So there's already the collected data sets on these factors. although they're very big and many of them are questionable, so I just told you that I think the key ones that can be measured and compared at least. Because if we talk about like less common factors, it's impossible to compare because some companies they disclose it, some companies don't, and so it's a big mess. Yeah. So I hope, yeah, I hope I answered the questions.
Again, as I said, thank you very much for a very informative lecture, and you covered so many different aspects. I think that everyone attended were like delighted to know so much about this new topic, and we hope that some of these participants will become your class attendants in the fall. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you teach the same class in the fall, like you taught this fall, right?
We'll see. There is a plan, but you know,
Okay.
in these times, yeah. But there is a plan.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And,
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for good questions, and we thank you for your time. And have a nice evening, and have a nice May holidays break. See you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.